Thank you, Martin. So my name is Pascal Giard. I am from McGill University. A little bit about me, but first, my things would be about protocols and the work we've done over the last, I think, month, maybe two. We didn't realize it would be that quick to do an implementation in GNU Radio, so just before starting, I'd like to say thanks to everyone who contributed to GNU Radio. It has gotten much better than last time I played around with it, which was around 2010, I think. So who am I? I am a PhD candidate and research assistant at McGill University. I also do course lectures, and I'm a research professional at École de Technologie Supérieure, also in Montreal. And I work mostly on efficient algorithms and implementation for modern error-correcting codes with a special focus on code codes. So we do all kinds of, well, personally I work a lot on FPGA, basic implementations, so mostly hardware at the beginning, but then I moved over and to doing both software and hardware. And here today is mostly about SIMD implementations for Intel and ARM. I've done some CUDA work also with this. So first, what's error correction? Before going into protocols, what's error correction? How does that work? What is it? So say we have a communication between two people. One of the guys wants to know what is it that's over there. So one says, oh, it's a cat. And at the same time that it's pronouncing the word cat, there's some channel noise, say a plane, that goes over both of them and corrupts the message. And the guy hears bat. Now he's unable to fix this. There's an error when he receives the transmission. So what we do, the guys of error correction, we add some redundancy to the message before transmitting the message so that the receiver, in this case the other guy on the other end, is able to figure out and decode that there's been an error and fix it. So in this case, the redundancy that we can add is some more information about the message, or in this case, in this example, meow. So the guy says cat, meow. The other guy receives bat and meow. So he's able to figure out, oh, he must be talking about the cat. So in error correction parlance, the redundancy that we added, we call that the parity. And the whole thing, the information that we wanted to transmit and the parity, together we call that a code word. On the receiving end, the device that takes as an input the code word and detects and corrects the errors, we call that a decoder. All right, that's all good. How good can we make this into a digital system? How good? Because we don't want to add too much redundancy into our message, otherwise we won't be transmitting much. So we'd like to know what's the theoretical bounds on this. And this guy, that some of you might know, called Shannon, who established the theoretical bounds on how good we can make this. And we call that the channel capacity. So there, since 1948, we came out with error-correcting codes that try to achieve that channel capacity. Because knowing the theoretical bounds is nice and all that, but unfortunately, Claude Shannon didn't tell us how to get there. So we tried to come up with schemes that were able to get as close as possible. So there's Ben Gallagher proposed in the 60s the LDPC code, but unfortunately back then they were too complex for the computers we had, so we sort of forgot about that. In 93, Xavier and Shannon came up with the turbo codes that were 0.7 dB away from the channel capacity, so very good. And then in 2004, the LDPC codes were rediscovered. Or McKay, I guess he thought he was the first, but unfortunately, he just found again the LDPC codes very close to channel capacity, 0.04 dB away. So we call those both modern error-correcting codes, turbo and LDPC codes. We call them capacity approaching codes. They don't meet the capacity, but they are very close, so we call them approaching. More recently, in 2008, Eldad Arica came up and proposed the polar codes. Those codes are not only capacity approaching, they are capacity achieving. Unfortunately, there are some caveats. One of them is not a big deal. It's using a loop complexity algorithm, so that's not a caveat. The caveat itself is that it says that it achieves, provably achieves capacity if the frame length is infinite, as it goes to infinity. Not very practical, right? But first, before trying to tackle those two problems, not problems, but tackle that problem in particular, a bit about turbo codes and MPC codes. Why should you care about polar codes? Because you know probably about turbo codes and MPC codes already. So turbo codes and LPC codes, it's very hard, very challenging to implement efficient decoders for them in software. Very challenging. At least to get decent throughputs. It's not the algorithm themselves that are hard to implement. It's just that it's hard to have a decent throughput. When it comes to the polar codes themselves, well, the original proposal was to use successive translation as an algorithm to decode them. That's what Giard has presented yesterday, for example. The issue with that is that, and I'll go into this a bit more later in the presentation, but the issue is that successive translation is by nature a sequential algorithm. So even if you optimize as much as you can the implementation, it will remain a low throughput decoding algorithm. And the other issue I mentioned, so the solution to that is to use a better algorithm. I'll come back to it. And the other issue, as I said, is that we don't want to deal with infinite length frames. So polar codes, they are probably capacity achieving if they are infinite length. In practice, their performance at membrane content is modest. They become very good with extremely large frames. But the truth is, if we make a fair comparison, they are still very competitive with moderate length if you compare against LPC or so. I'll come back to that at the very end of the answer. So what better algorithm that calculation can we use? Well, FEC. So you see at the bottom, my colleague Gabby and I proposed an algorithm back in May 2004 in JSAC. That's called FEC. I'll go back to what that algorithm is, but for now, let's just say that it's orders of magnitude more efficient than successive cancellation. And as we were developing the hardware implementations for this, we figured, oh wow, this could be very well implemented on a SIMD processor. And we could arrange an array in a very efficient way too for vector processing. And the FEC algorithm happens to be a natural fit for systematic coding as well. So some of you might know that in communication systems, we really like to deal with systematic coding because it allows us to do adaptive rate and things like that. And in the case of polar codes, it also happens that systematic codes have a better rate than the non-systematic counterparts. Oh, wait a second, what's a systematic code? Well, does that work? So when we talk about a 8-4 code in error correction parlance, what we mean is that we are dealing with code words that has 8 bits, among which 4 are information bits and 4 are parity bits in this case. The 4 here really designates the number of information bits within the code. If we have a non-systematic encoder, what happens is that we feed it our information bits, and on the other end, we get some transformation. Our information bits, we could find them somewhere in there if we apply the reverse transformation, but they do not appear in the clear. If we're dealing with a systematic code, what happens is that once we send those bits through the encoder, on the other end, we get our information bits, along with some more bits, the parity bits. So they appear there in the clear. Very useful. So how do we achieve that? If we come back to the non-systematic polar encoder that Giard showed yesterday very quickly, how does that work? If we look at it as a graph. So the way we encode is that on the left is the left to right operation in this case. So on the left-hand side, we have 8 inputs, among which we feed our for information bits into it. The other positions, we enter a 0. We say that we freeze those positions. So we freeze with zeros, and we let the information flow from left to right. And on the other end, we get our code word that we're going to modulate and send over the channel. Modulate, filter, send over the channel. So that's how non-systematic color encoding works. Systematic color encoding, how does it work? Well, the original proposal from American was a lot more complex, but we have shown, my colleague and I, again, the papers are there, if you want to look into the details, that if the color code is constructed correctly, you can do systematic encoding this way. So 2 passes of non-systematic encoding where in between you're refreezing the positions that were frozen in the first pass. So fairly simple. All right. Now let's go on to how we move from successive cancellation decoding to fast SS decoding. Just a quick reminder of how we decode using successive cancellation. Encoding was from left to right, decoding is from right to left. I kept the same graph. So we get the information from the channel on the right-hand side, that's my Y. And we sequentially, as the name successive cancellation, estimate each of the bits. So first we do this computation, the arrows in blue. We estimate U of 0. Using the information of U of 0, we estimate U of 1. Then once we have U of 0 and U of 1, we estimate U of 2, so on and so forth, until we have decoded, estimated the complete code. So that's how successive cancellation decoding works. Now before showing how FSSC works, let's move from a graph representation to a tree representation, which is more friendly when you are looking to patterns. So you might have noticed that some of those bits, some of those views are in gray instead of black. So those correspond to the frozen bit locations that we had earlier in my example. So we're going to transform this graph in a tree. And the frozen bits, we put them, frozen bit locations, we put them in white nodes, as white nodes, and the information bits, those that actually carry our information that get transformed into black. And then each of those successive transformations, we merge them into a node. So at the leaf nodes are at size 1, and as you go up the tree, the size of the nodes are fused. So these root nodes, those trees taking root there, are of size 2, and now you end up with a tree. All right, so with this representation, we're ready to move towards FSSC to understand how it works. So the idea is to get rid of some useless operations to make decoding simpler. We want to trim this tree. That's the first thing we want to do. Remove the calculations that we don't need without impacting the error correction performance. So the first thing that was done was simplified successive cancellation by Alan Giard and Shishang at the University of Toronto, that they figured that, oh, those subtrees where you're actually in the presence of rate 0 codes, we don't have to do any decoding in there. We know in advance that the answer is going to be the all 0 vector, and that's the maximum likelihood. Everything in there is 0, and so when we did the encoding, you can look at there, look at there, up there, those two guys, 0 or 0 is always 0. So we know that the output on those two wires right up there is always going to be 0. We don't need to try to estimate them. We know that. We share that information. It's a little secret between the transmitter and the receiver. The frozen bit locations are known in advance. So we don't need to decode that subtree. We can remove it. And the rate 1 subtrees, we don't need to do as complex of an algorithm to decode them either, because maximum likelihood tells us that we just have to take a hard decision on those sub-information, and it's the same thing. So we trim off those subtrees, and we end up with a smaller decoder tree. Because successive cancellation decoding, it just visits all the nodes depth first. So as we trim the tree, our decoding becomes shorter. that FastSSC, how does it work? But it recognizes more patterns and uses more efficient algorithms on those sub-patterns, on those subtrees, to decode them, to become more efficient. So that pattern we have up there is called a repetition code, because if you look at how the encoder works, effectively, it's just that our little black node there gets repeated a number of times. So we don't need to do regular successive cancellation that works for the general case. We can only use the algorithm to decode a repetition node. And the bottom one is a single per repeat check code, where the single spot that was the frozen bit becomes a parity of the remainder of the bits. So we have more effective algorithms to decode those subparts, and then we end up with a even more trim decoder tree, effectively reducing the latency and increasing the throughput of our decoder. So the key idea of FastSSC is to use more efficient algorithms on some patterns that appear in our decoder tree. And in fact, FastSSC supports more type of patterns that I'm not covering here. You don't really care about that stuff. And let's look at some example of specific code. So say I have this 256, 230 polar code, and I want to decode this guy using successive cancellation. That's what my decoder tree looks like. It's humongous. So I will have to visit each of these nodes that first. It takes a very long time. If I apply SSC to that decoder tree, then it becomes much smaller. That's the one on the left-hand side. And if I apply the FastSSC simplifications, I end up with a tree on the right-hand side, which is much smaller. That's why you can easily see that we get orders of magnitude improvements in terms of complexity, throughput, latency, and all that. All right, so to prove our concept, I managed to convince my advisor and some other professors that it would be a good idea to do an implementation in GNU Radio to show the people, especially the industry and other researchers, that it works. It's not just simulation and academic stuff. It really works in a real system. So we've done that. We did the implementation of a systematic polar system. Using a subset of the FastSSC nodes, we didn't pull out all the tricks we have out there. We've used the FEC API. It supports soft inputs for greater error correction performance. It's not mandatory, but it also works with our decisions. It's just that you won't get that much of a coding gain if you do so. It uses fixed point arithmetics internally. We have highly optimized wall cloners using SSC4, or if it's available, AVX2. We even have kernels for Neon as well. So here's our classical example, a bit of a cheating there for the error correction guys, where there's not even, there's only Gaussian noise basically, and we just draw the curves to make sure that it actually works. But we've also done it in a real system, which is bigger here, and just, yeah, that's not really a nice idea. But so that's a real communication chain using USRPs. So on the transmit side, we generate some random stuff. So generate some random stuff. We encode them using a polar encoder. We pack them, we send them to a packet encoder that will add a preamble, does some whitening. I think whitening was disabled in that example, but it works now. So through a cancellation encoder, then that also does the filtering. I think the root race cosine sends over to the USRP, and then receiving end, we have AGC, clock sync, equalizer, Custom loop, and all that. And eventually, cancellation sub-decoder, the sub-packet decoder that we have to write, and our polar decoder. So the complete system. So performance results, what does it look like? Is it really an improvement over the other modern decoders we have out there? Well, under the worst conditions for a polar code, we managed to get the stable 50 gigabits per second on a very low power standard bridge using only SSC4. That's the throughput of not the complete chain, to be fair, just our decoder. Because for the rest of the complete chain, we did a bad job. I think we could get much better results than that. We have to look at this. Under good conditions, a more recent Pascal AVX2 processor, we get easily a 250 megabits per second average throughput. So that's fairly good. It's not our best results. We didn't use all the tricks we had. We just wanted to have something quick that works. So just with that, in the complete computation chain, the modern FEC for the recorrection is no longer a bottleneck. So we thought that was nice. If we look at some results shown by the excellent performance monitor, our encoder and decoder are right there. And actually, it's a bit weird, but the encoder was worse than our decoder was performing worse. To be fair, the encoder was generic, so it supports all kind of codes, polar codes, so it's really not optimal. We could be a bit better. But the point is that it's no longer the bottleneck, so that's nice. We can work on the other parts of the system. So final words, will this be upstream into GNU Radio and Walk? Short answer, for IP reasons, I think it's not going to be possible to have it right into GNU Radio, but we are strong believers in open source and we want to put it out there out of free on C grant. So you'll be able to play around with that, see if that works for you. So the source code will be available. When can you start using it? Well, really, that part doesn't depend on me. I hope our lawyers at McGill can sort this out pretty quickly. And what if you want to use protocols outside of GNU Radio or in GNU Radio? I should have put both there. Well, it'll be a pleasure if you come to me. We can speak about that. We have a complete tool chain that can auto-generate for different targets. So Cindy for x86, CUDA for GPUs, Neon for ARMs. We have a very high-speed IO-bound RTL that we can generate, or very compact, moderate, gigabits a second speed implementation as well. All right, just at the end, just want to acknowledge the help of support of some of the people there at PTS and McGill and our contact information. I think this is it. I have some hidden slides. Do I have the time for hidden slides? Yeah. So some of you might know about error correction when I said protocols can be competitive with the LDPC in some cases. Here's a look at the error correction performance of LDPC codes from WiMAX when they are decoded using the offset scale-in sum algorithm. That's BPSK over AWGN. So you can see that the pink curve, that's actually not my summation, but results from an LDPC paper. That's 4 or 5 iterations. And the polar code here of similar length and rate, so it's 2K, rate 1/2 is green, so it's a bit better than 5 iterations of LDPC in this case. And if you do 10 iterations, then the LDPC becomes slightly better, but it's not humongous. So if you know about the complexity of implementing an LDPC decoding software, I would strongly advise to try polar code in this case. And the reds and the curves on the right-hand side are lower rates, and in that case, we have to bump up the length of the PC, the polar code, to match the performance of the LDPC code, but it's not that far off. We're talking about 2K instead of 1,200 bits, so not too bad. And finally, I said that the performance in the GNU Radio were not that great. We can implement all the those and all that. Just a quick results showing our best effort results for longer codes and different codes. Implementations that we didn't port into GNU Radio, we were able to achieve information throughput of greater than 1 gigabits per second on AVX2 processors. And Legal is the work. So Legal is the work of collaborators we have in France who have a different approach. They do inter-frame parallelism. We do intra-frame parallelism. So they have much higher latency, obviously, but they also have great throughput. All right, some GPU results. On GPUs, we are I/O bound, unfortunately. So we cannot get much better throughput than this. And as some of you know, unfortunately, on GPU, the latency is, not that great. So maybe that's a right application for that.
sure there's some questions. John?
I have two questions. Have you looked into FPGA implementations of your work?
Oh yeah, a lot. And our latest work, I'm very excited. I'd like to start working with RFNOC as soon as possible. As soon as I get back to Montreal, I bought one of my boss to buy some of these fancy X300 series of FPGAs. Yes. We've done a lot of different implementations, me personally as well. So yes, we can do very compact or high bound decoders depending. Like I just got the electronics letter published where my decoder reaches a decoded throughput of coded throughput, of 236 gigabits per second. So, but that one is fairly big. So the very compact ones, if you want to use only a small fraction of the FPGA, we're talking about a few gigabits per second of information throughput.
Great. You answered my second question.
I can.
Well,
I'll just mention in the meantime also we have, for those who are aware, there are more complex algorithms to decode protocols that offer greater error correction performance. One of those is called the list decoding algorithm, where you, before encoding your protocol, you append the CRC, and then on the decoding side, you do list decoding and look at the CRC. And we also have hardware and software implementations of those. The software ones can reach, so this is state of the art, I'm trying not to lie. If I remember correctly, we're talking about 800 megabits per second on a ASWAL SDX2 CPU. Yeah.
So is the fast SSC decoding scheme of polar codes something that can be integrated into a hybrid ARQ scheme? And if so, do you see a path to doing so in GNU radio?
Oh yeah, totally. That's my goal. Yeah. Yes. That's why we care so much about systematic encoding, actually. Yeah.
we have more time, so don't hold back. Someone?
I was pointed out there.
This sounds like it's fairly new. Has this been used in polar codes specifically, I guess, in any commercial?
But yes, there are companies, I don't know if you'll put that on the website, I don't like to do publicity for companies in particular, but there are players out there who are pushing very strongly to have the official, at least one of the official error correcting codes in the next 5 generations to be a systematic polar code, yes. We can talk about this offline. There are, people you know, I'm sure. Well, companies you know.
Okay, I see no more hands except for one.
You talked about 238 gigabits per second. How does that compare performance-wise? I mean, their trade-offs probably with throughput versus performance. How do those perform going that fast compared to other codes that are out there?
Okay, so there are many parameters there, of course. So that code was a very short code, 1K code rate 1/2. So it relates to what I showed up there. So compare it to, was it 1K or 2K? Excuse me, try to get back here. So it's not exactly performance, it's not fair to compare against that 2K code, but it's in that range. No? So that 200 and something is there. So my other paper, which was submitted only for the 2K code, was 400 and something gigabits per second. At that point, the problem is really getting the data in and out. So that's the issue. And the other thing is that those things that's for a fully unrolled decoder, so it's huge. So either you go for an application that needs you move just another throughput, and you do something like that, and you sort of dedicate your FPGA to it. Or if you want something compact, then you use something like slightly slower.
Will you be here tomorrow?
Yeah, I'll be around tomorrow, of course.
And I can assume that once you have everything sorted out with you all the way, so you'll be announcing this in the mailing list and...
Yeah,
So,
of course.
okay. Well then, thank you again very much.